So I'm going to introduce unless you know all these people? No. Okay, good. I'm going to give introductions. I think it's always important to know, the perspective of the people that are coming and to briefly acknowledge their accomplishments. I will say, and I apologize to both of you, that I've cut your bios way down just because this is a very informal talk. But starting with Lauren. Lauren is a visual artist based in Detroit whose practice is rooted in contemporary craft, sculpture, video, photography, and performance. Her work investigates beauty, adornment, body image, and the built environment. Coleman completed her PhD in practice-led research from the School of Art and Design at the Australian National University, and she also has an MFA in Art and Technology from Ohio State University, and a BFA from Massachusetts College of Art. Her work has been exhibited internationally and is in the permanent collections of many museums. This is the editing part. She has been awarded multiple international residencies and grants. Please look her up. She's very accomplished. And currently, she is a professor and chair of the Department of Art, Art History, and Design at Wayne State University. Ebi Baralaye, I had it down, is a ceramicist, sculptor, designer, and educator. His work explores cultural, spiritual, and material translations of objects, text, and symbols interpreted through a diaspora lens and abstracted around the aesthetics of craft and design. He received a BFA in ceramics from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA in ceramics from the Cranbrook Academy of Art. Baralaye? Baralaye's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and Baralaye has participated in multiple residencies. Again, very edited, and I apologize for that. Very accomplished, though. He is currently an assistant professor in the Stamps School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan. And I will say that Ebi taught down the road at CCS, too, so he brings that perspective also. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got into academia. Just tell us that story to get us moving.
Do you want to start, Ebi?
Sure. Hello. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Academia. As far as how I got started, it might seem like an odd place to start, but I had a father who was a really great storyteller and who I could tell when he connected with the things he loved to learn and loved to share, just really lit up. And for a while, he was living in New Jersey, and he was a tutor. I think it was at Montclair State for like nursing students. He was a doctor for a little bit, and I just can tell that particularly fed him, that particularly resonated with both his personality and his sense of passion. And I just, for whatever reason, that always stood, I don't know, for whatever reason, that always kind of stood in my brain. When I was, going through undergrad and then my master's program, I had really great teachers who shaped me into the artist and also the human being I've become, and I'm sure you all can say the same, that you can probably list a number, if not many, educators who were all really formative in you becoming the individuals and the artists, and potentially someday also the teachers that you are. I didn't really consider the possibility of teaching until I started to think more intentionally about grad school, and this is like 8 years after undergrad. So I went to RISD, and it took me that long before I even was considering coming back into academia. And one of the things that I considered doing was teaching, but I also really didn't want to teach unless I felt like I had something to give, something to share. And even 8 years after undergrad and coming into Cranbrook, I just still felt a little too, new to things to consider myself a teacher. Coming here to Cranbrook was really what turned that around for me. I feel like the mentor model here at Cranbrook really models what the best parts of teaching. In coming to Cranbrook, I'd almost given up the thought of teaching because there's no undergraduate program here. You have other MFA programs. that have graduate assistantships that make sense for then, pivoting into being an educator and coming to Cranbrook. I was like, well, I'm just gonna, I just really love this school. I'm gonna learn how to be a better studio artist. I'm gonna move to Detroit. I'm gonna make my work, So being an educator wasn't really even on my mind at all coming in. And then that first year, and I had a really wonderful first year, and I had a really great mentor in Anders Ruold, the previous heir of ceramics. And I would say it was both his mentorship as well as the guidance and mentorship and example of all of the other really exemplary heirs that were there at the time and are still, some of which are still here, that really led me to think again about teaching. And then I ended up applying for the ACAD fellowship program, which I found out about specifically as a result of being here. So the program had piloted my first year, and the second year, the representatives who kind of started the program came and did a symposium at the school. So I got to meet them, and the institution that I ended up applying and getting accepted to for the fellowship was the same institution where they taught SFAI, the San Francisco Art Institute. A great place. I never imagined myself moving to San Francisco. When I came to Cranbrook, I had moved from New York, so I was kind of done with big, expensive cities. I was very much ready for Detroit, a place that felt very small, but also kind of very ripe. But when I got accepted into SFAI for this ACAD fellowship that specifically focused on diversifying the professorate, but also just getting qualified candidates into ACAD institutions as teachers, I was like, all right, let me give this a shot. This is a really great opportunity to give teaching a chance. So I said yes. I moved to San Francisco, and I had an amazing, I would say, experience as an educator there. It was a lot because I literally went from being a student one year to the very next year being a teacher. And I had literally never taught before. My only teaching experience prior had been just doing kind of like, one-off workshops with friends while I was here. So it was very much like drinking from the fire hose, but it was like a fire hose full of, I don't know, Mountain Dew or Verner's, just something. It was a lot, but it was also very good, at the same time. So that was 2 years. Then I adjuncted. I was an adjunct for a year once the fellowship ended, and I was like, how am I going to make this work, as an adjunct?
Same institution?
Yeah, at SFAI. I had a really good relationship with the leadership there. But for me, I was like, how am I going to make a living in San Francisco as an adjunct? I love the school. I love the students. I loved everything about it. And then that's when, the call came for CCS. So I was fortunate in that way.
Yeah. Thank you.
I feel like I have much less noble sort of intentions of teaching. I feel like I tripped into academia. So I went to graduate school in 2004. I started at Ohio State, and that is an institution that has GTAs. So I was teaching while I was in my graduate training, and we were on the quarter system, so I actually taught 3 classes a year. So I was getting a fair bit of teaching experience, but I'm also inherently an asocial introvert. So, teaching was like never at that point just like super fun for me. I have grown, like that has been a muscle that I've grown into being comfortable. Here I am speaking into a microphone. I think, so what happened was I was finishing up my graduate program. I didn't have a plan at that time. And I was... what was I doing? I had a colleague in my graduate program, and y'all can come in and sit down if you want to. Okay. Okay, great. That's fine. Or you can be up there. That's cool. I had a colleague whose partner had left a job in Nashville at a tiny art school called Watkins College. It was about 350 students. And this was in May. So what I'll share is that searches for faculty positions tend to be posted in October and November. So May is very, very late for a job posting. And she goes, there's this position open, and I've already put your name in as a recommendation. You need to get your CV in teaching philosophy in tomorrow. And I was like, teaching philosophy? And so I reached out for some help. I got my application packet together. I submitted it. It was, if not the next day, within a couple days. And then had, I don't even know if I had a phone interview. I might have skipped right to a campus interview. And was really lucky because my former boss and who became a friend of mine literally coached me through the entire interview. Somebody would ask a question and I would sort of get it wrong. He'd be like, I think you mean that. So it's like they were really desperate to have somebody in that position.
Or to have you.
Yeah. So I ended up getting the job, and I was the coordinator of the 3D program, so sculpture, and I was, also running, the wood shop, the foundry. And while I was there, I helped found the 4D program, time-based media program. But I wasn't at the time super keen on Nashville, and I was also hired at $35,000, which at the time I was like, this is rad, I have a salary, but it actually is not that much money. And there's a thing called salary compression that your raises are percentage-based, and when you start with a low salary, your incremental percentages only go up so much. So I was never going to really accumulate a livable salary, compared to inflation. And so, I'm still in my mid-20s, and I was like, well, I'll just quit this job and move somewhere else, which is apparently not what one does with teaching jobs. But it was also not a tenure track job, which is, for those of you that are aware of academia, that's on the trajectory to have permanent job security. So I left that job. I was planning to move to New York. I had a job lined up at a foundry. I'd also been kind of putting feelers out for other positions, and I ended up getting like a 3/4 time gig at Brown University. And so I moved to, I couldn't find an apartment in New York. I had a job, but no apartment. So I was like, well, guess I'm going to Providence. This was in 2008. I taught 3/4 time at Brown, which means no benefits. It's fancy adjunct is what that means. And then the economy tanked in 2008. They lost the line for that position, but thankfully I'd been in communication with folks at RISD, so I sort of just rolled down the hill to RISD and taught part-time in the jewelry and sculpture program, and also did the adjunct hustle. I was teaching at Northeastern and Bristol Community College and Rhode Island College, sometimes 5 classes a semester, and at the end of 2 years, I was like, this is enough. And I started applying for full-time jobs again. And the year that I got my job as an assistant professor at Wayne State, I think I also had an offer for a visiting assistant professor position at Tulane and an assistant professor position at VCU Qatar. Sort of really interesting set of choices. But I went with the tenure track position at Wayne State. And so I've been there been at Wayne State since 2011 and have moved up through the tenure system, and kind of by surprise, again, I seem to not plan my jobs and kind of fall into them, became the department chair just about 2 years ago when we had a void and needed somebody to step in. So that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to throw this out that, we might start talking about things that you have a question about, or you might have a question about something completely different. So I want to encourage you to, ask questions along the way too, because, I think that once you kind of get these jobs to adjuncting and 3/4 time and tenure track, I think, those are commonly used terms, but if you want to know more about that, or you want to know about something completely different, please interrupt us. And I can talk about how I got into this, but I just want to pause to see if there's any questions first. Guys okay? Yeah?
I
Can you wait for the mic, though, so it shows up on the tape? Yeah, it's coming. Thanks, Benita.
I'm curious, like, if it's pretty typical to start with, like, kind of an entry level or, like, a coordinator position or some kind of, like, less full-time, less prestigious than tenure track position and, like, over time work your way to tenure track positions? Like, is that, typical or, I don't know. Yeah.
I think it's less, there are less typical patterns now than there used to be, and it kind of depends. Some people, if you come out of a tenure track institution with a whole bunch of teaching experience, I think it's reasonable to start applying for assistant professor jobs. But yeah, if it's tenure track, you're going to probably start at the assistant professor level, which is the bottom. I think the pattern used to be, and I'm older than, I don't know, I'm assuming I'm older than Lauren because she just gave us her dates, and I got my first full-time teaching job in 1994, and I was paid $32,000 also, which I was very happy to have, but that was a lot earlier than yours. But normally you need about 3 years of teaching experience in higher ed. So adjuncting, visiting professorship, is that kind of where you guys were before you got your full-time job, about 3 years?
So I've noticed a pattern over the past couple of years where I'm seeing more posts for like 1 year visiting professorships, where there's an opportunity to kind of jump, and you still need the experience. Perhaps with those, there's a little bit more flexibility around how much. My impression, or what I was noticing when I was applying to positions after SFAI, which would have been in about 2018, is that a lot of places were looking for at least 2 years of teaching experience at an institution. But as far as getting your foot in the door, which is kind of, I guess, where this question is going, sure, you can apply for a job as like a technician or a coordinator at a school. Is that the best way to then transition to teaching? I feel like some places have rules about whether or not you can teach if you're also serving in some other capacity at the institution, so that's worth looking into. I know at CCS the technicians taught, at U of M the technicians also get to teach, so they're in a lot of ways lecturers themselves. So that could be a way, with the technical skills that you have, to then be able to step into a teaching role as well. I wanted to add to that, too, as far as just getting your foot in the door, there are so many different like art and craft institutions that are looking for educators to come and teach workshops. Some like Oxbow here in Michigan, and all the numerous ones around the country. Some of them want a lot of experience as well, but some of them are kind of more flexible and open and more experimental in kind of seeking educators and seeking really interesting and fun classes. So if you're good at what you do, and I imagine you all are as Cranbrook artists, there's space for you to propose a workshop or a class and get experience that way. I'll say too, as being somebody who's been at an institution and potentially looking to hire, or just looking out for other educators to teach in programs, just reaching out. When I was at CCS, people would just reach out to me and say, hey, I'm a Cranbrook student or Cranbrook alum, or I'm so-and-so alum. I would love to be able to adjunct if you ever have a need for an instructor. Just kind of getting yourself in the system either informally by like a direct ask. There's nothing wrong with that. I know a number of institutions will also have a formal program or a formal way for you to apply for lecturer or adjunct positions, and it might seem like a drop in the bucket, but it really does make a difference. And why not also add with, submitting your resume, a note to the coordinator of the program or the chair of the program, just to let them, put a I guess somewhat of a face through an email to your name. And then also like being a sub, like I know subbing is different in different institutions, but teachers are busy, and so often, we will need someone to kind of step in and kind of take the reins for a class or two, and that kind of gets you in the system at these institutions and also puts you on the radar of the people who are potentially hiring for adjunct positions. And I know that I think a number of my subs have become or had become at CCS adjuncts in the program. So there are a lot of kind of like small incremental ways just to get your foot in the door. And I don't think I've even mentioned all of them.
Yeah, and that's how I got my first full-time, that's how I got my experience. I was in South Carolina. I proposed a continuing ed class. I taught that. I got a class at 5 different institutions, and I was teaching 6 classes a semester and driving between them. And then I moved to Chicago because I needed to get out of the South without a job. This is a pattern. And I just called on the phone because there was no internet then, all the chairs of the community colleges and SAIC, and I got a hold of the SAIC person and went in for an interview, and they didn't need anybody, so I was like, well, that was a waste of time, but they had my resume. And the next week, they needed a sabbatical replacement, and I got a full class at SAIC, and that helped me get the next job, which was a full-time job at MyAd. So, they might not need it now, but a week later, they might need it because an adjunct gets a full-time job or an adjunct's partner gets a job. And so it's good to know the chair's name, to email the chair, send your resume along on the email, and just tell them in a very short email who you are and that you'd love to meet them. And if you have any needs, here's my CV.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we always, every semester, have a last-minute opening. And I think, sending a portfolio, being preemptive, send a portfolio. Even some adjunct positions, it is helpful to have teaching. And I would say so adjunct, for those of you who don't know, that's part-time faculty. It's contract work. You're paid per course or per credit hour, depending on the institution, usually very little. Depending on the institution. It ranges quite broadly, but...
But in my experience at that point in my life, that was like a whirlwind of money. Because
you can piece it
great.
together, for sure. But places to start thinking are like pre-college programs, community colleges, which I will tell you often have excellent facilities because of the way they're funded. Advanced high school courses. There are ways to get teaching experience that isn't at the university level necessarily that folks will consider. And then document student work no matter where you are. If it's a workshop, if it's pre-college, that's a really valuable resource to have is documentation of student work. What I will say to answer that question though, about starting as a tech, or as an adjunct faculty or part-time faculty, is not necessarily a trajectory into the institution you're currently in. And in fact, it's very rare that a position will open up at an institution you're adjuncting at and that you will get that role. It happens. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it is a much rarer instance that occurs. So usually the adjunct position is a gateway into another institution.
Before we keep going, any other?
Yeah.
Can you wait for the mic?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. I know you have a booming voice, but
It is loud. I'll be a little quieter. So is it apples to apples as far as teaching experience? Say if someone was a K through 12 educator, or if they were educator at, say, local, you have these places like in ceramics, right? You've got Haystack, or you've got these other centers for, or like there's Black Forge Foundry in Seattle, or, these other places that maybe are not as well known. Are those kind of like, can be direct substitutes for experience within the higher educational dynamic?
yeah, we probably all have slightly similar and different opinions, but in my opinion, like I got my first full-time teaching job because I had a range of experience, but I will say that often search committees look for experience teaching adults. So that, like the K through 12 doesn't necessarily, it's probably arrogant and we should reconsider it. It shows that you have an interest in teaching, but it doesn't necessarily check that box for teaching in higher ed experience. But I got my first job because I had taught at a community college in the South. I had taught adults. I had taught at a pretty prestigious art school. I had shown that I could hustle and develop new courses, and they liked that range of experience.
Yeah, but I would say the pre-college, like, if you're teaching a pre-college course, you're essentially teaching a college course, but for advanced high school students, and so that kind of thing. I mean, it all experience is experience, though, and really sometimes, I think Lynn is right that like we often are in a position where we just need somebody, and so the quality of work matters. Teaching experience, like any teaching experience, matters, and then some general understanding of what shaping a college course looks like. I think academia has changed since we all started, and things like assessment metrics, rubrics, how grading happens, how we deal with student disability services, all of that is part of teaching, and having taught means that you've dealt with some of that, the sort of stuff that is not the teaching of the skills that you're doing in the classroom. So having like even just familiarizing yourself with how a higher education system works and knowing the language around it, reaching out to your mentors to talk about like how to formulate and think about these things, reading about pedagogy, like it's a place to start. Yeah.
I mean, this is where just really kind of picking, because every application is going to be different, and some are going to be really specific in what they're looking for. Some might say specifically looking for 2 years of experience teaching at an undergraduate institution. And if they ask for that, great. If you're just shy of that, I wouldn't say that that's a hard no. And if they don't specify, but you feel like you're bringing really strong experience in the aggregate by teaching workshops, by putting syllabi together in other ways, go for it. But you just want to honor first what's being asked for, and then representing yourself strongly in the role that you're trying to go for. So if you're applying for a job at a undergraduate institution, you want to strongly reflect, in your application that you're ready and prepared for that, and all the assets that you provide, even if that's not specifically noted in the application. So there's flexibility there. I would say if you're not sure, I mean, you can even ask. You can even just kind of send a note. Usually there is an email or an HR kind of email that you can just kind of just kind of drop a note in and just ask if you're not sure whether or not you're fully qualified. But I don't know, this is as long as you're putting in a strong application and you meaningfully see yourself doing well within the position, it's always worth applying for.
And I'll add, there's research out there that shows that women, people of color, will read a job application and disqualify themselves from the application. So if you feel close, you should apply. Like, because they're making a wish list for a perfect candidate, and I guarantee there is not that person out there. So, I would say, don't shove yourself into a position that you really don't fit for. But if you're hitting most of the marks, don't let the ones that you don't hit be the thing. Don't self-select yourself out, because if you don't apply, you don't have a chance.
Really quickly too, I feel like we're in a climate where it's safe to embrace the thought that you all are probably far more qualified than you realized, than you realize, and also if there's any kind of season to think or look on that positively, I feel like it's now, the climate we're in.
I concur. And I was just going to say, don't forget about all of the experience you gained with your peer-to-peer teaching that you do, I know you do this here. You can't claim that as 2 years of teaching in higher ed necessarily, but if you've given a workshop here, and if you have, led a discussion group a graduate level discussion group here. I know this happens here at Cranbrook. If you can articulate in your cover letter the level of peer-to-peer contributions you made here and what you learned from them, that I think articulating that will connect some dots for people that are looking at your resume that aren't coming from Cranbrook too. All graduate schools do that, so that doesn't necessarily distinguish you, but if you have an articulate way to connect that, I think you might get an interview where you might not if you don't connect that in the cover letter.
And you have to be your own advocate. You have to you have to spell things out. I would say, as I coach my students through letter writing and grant proposals, you have to contextualize your practice and your teaching. Don't assume that the letter readers understand. And so I think Lynn's absolutely right. You've got to sort of connect the dots for the people looking at your materials.
And a lot of the resources in professional practices in the spring, I offer mock interviews, but I also will read your cover letter. I'll have office hours, and so will Michael Stone Richards, and I'm sure your heirs will do this too. But sometimes I always ask for the materials description and the position description, and then we go kind of line by line, like, I don't know what you mean by this. I don't know what you mean by this. You have to unpack this a little bit for me. Because you're right, you don't have to check every box, but you do have to make it easy to read and easy for people to say yes to you, because there are often, especially in a painting search, and I say this as a painter, there can be a lot of applicants for full-time tenure-track positions too. So the better you can write and the easier that cover letter is to read, the more likely you are to get through
There could
the
be
door.
hundreds of applications, and for some searches.
There's a question here. Send the mic down.
Okay, so if you have, I worked in museum education, arts administration, managed pre-college courses, for high school students. But I was I feel in terms of comparable teaching experience, that feels positive. But I was wondering about the relevance or the benefit of, say, my exhibition record is just not, I have a lot of teaching experience, lots of arts administration experience, but not a huge exhibition record. I've had a couple things published in little journals, but how much does that reflect value for an applicant to be super active in a gallery scene or things like that?
Maybe we should talk about types of institutions.
Yep, it's going to vary.
As a segue into that, because I think there are teaching-centered institutions where the emphasis is on undergraduate education. You typically teach a higher course load, and you're teaching more courses a semester, and you either have no expectation for research or minimal expectation for research.
And just to complicate that a little bit, there are also research institutions that have teaching positions. So that might have a 4-4 teaching load, but no expectation for research. And then they have tenure-track faculty that have a 2-2 with a heavy research expectation.
So Abby and I are both now at what's called a Research 1 institution, which is a high level of research output. There's also R2s, which are also research institutions, but a little bit less. So it depends on the institution you're applying to. And I think when you're applying, make sure you understand the institution you're applying to. So if you're applying for a tenure track position in a research institution, then there is an expectation for, whatever you do, because research output can look different depending on discipline. But if you're a sort of traditional studio artist and the mode that you present your work is via galleries, then there's an expectation that there is a significant upward trajectory of an exhibition record. It's, when you're in an introductory position, it's understood that you are moving forward, but really what we're looking for growth, and we want to see a potential for success and a potential to gain tenure. And that means starting to see in an early CV some upward momentum. But if you're applying to an institution that focuses on teaching, or a job that focuses on teaching, then that may be less significant, but still having strong work, we want to see in a portfolio, evidence of your ability to make and transmit that to students.
I feel like it's harder to separate. I feel like now a strong portfolio without some sort of like a healthy, exhibition. It doesn't have to be extensive. I know. Some artists, their exhibition records are just like miles long, and it might seem intimidating, or you might feel like that has to be you as well. But it really doesn't. You want to be invested in being a maker. You want to be invested in having expertise in what you plan to teach. And I feel like the people who are reviewing applications are going to be sensitive to that. I don't think anyone's going to say, "Oh my goodness, this person has like like a 40 entry long list of all the shows that they've done or more," and be like, "Oh, let's definitely go for this person." It's like, no, we're looking for competency, or people who are in the committees are looking for competency, and if that's reflected both in your work and naturally, in addition to that, in an exhibition record, I don't feel like you would again want to disqualify yourself because you feel like, I know you don't have as long of an exhibition record as maybe some others might. You do want to have some there, but again, I feel like that does go pretty tightly along with like making good work. If you're making good work, you're going to be showing it, hopefully.
Yeah, and for an assistant professor position, the search committee is going to look at, are they getting their work out there? Because the art world's weird too. And if you're, like I did this in Milwaukee a lot, and we knew the good galleries in Milwaukee, but there were a bunch of startup spaces. And Detroit's like that too. So if you're on the coast, you should be showing, because there's a million ways to do that. If you're in a city, you should probably be showing too, but you might have to generate those yourself. So we would look for activity and a commitment to showing their work.
Yeah, and I use this word research when I talk about creative work, because I'm in a research institution, and that is how we speak to those that are not in the arts. We talk about studio practice as creative research, and this is, I think this is kind of important in applying to jobs, is understanding the vernacular that the institutions use. We're looking for people to understand that what they do is research, and in the institution, like the sort of research institutions we're in, it's not enough to just make work. Exhibiting work is the equivalent of publishing in the sciences. So that is how we justify impact and reach, is via exhibitions, publications, inclusion in fairs, whatever it is that your creative output ends up being. Having it publicly displayed in some way is that sort of final manifestation that it is impacting the field.
And just to circle back to the types of institutions, I think you did an amazing job of summarizing the research institutions and universities, but art schools are going to be somewhere between like a research one in the expectations and a teaching institution. So you're going to teach a little bit more, but they do want really impactful, influential artists, especially the bigger art schools and the more prestigious art schools are going to really care about your research. But if your work is interesting and you've only had your MFA show and a couple other things, they'll want to talk to you if your work is good. And I think the most important thing for all of these jobs is do good work, and then opportunities. You have to get yourself out there too, but you can't not have good work.
And good documentation.
And I'll say too, you also want to know like what's the right fit for you. It might seem like the idea is to get to an R1, but not necessarily. Some of you could potentially be like very happy and very comfortable being adjuncts at like a teaching institution or, another ACAD institution. Really it comes down to, I know when you're starting off, you're just trying to get your foot in the door. So you're taking really just, the opportunities that you can get. But ultimately, if you're in this for the long run, some of you might be, and some of you might not be, and that's also fine. Like, you don't have to teach. There are other ways of making a living that are great. Some of you are going to be full-time artists. I know that might seem like an impossible thing, but I don't think it's an impossible thing at all. You can be a full-time artist. That's a reality for a lot of people without needing to be like a megastar. So you can really ask yourself, sure, you want to break into teaching, you're going to do a lot of different things, more than likely, but then eventually you have to ask yourself, well, what makes sense for me? What's the rhythm of teaching and making and research that matters? And also, where do I want to be? Like, I feel like your city matters a lot to you. So sure, you might get an R1, but if you're like in the middle of, I don't want to offend anybody's state, but if you're in the middle
I'm from
of
Ohio. You can say Ohio.
if you're in the middle of nowhere to you at some R1 and you're just not being fed by community and by your city and by the things that you need, that's not necessarily going to be a healthier situation for you than maybe at like a teaching institution in a very vibrant city that's really engaging and meaningful and just like better for you. So it might seem like there's a hierarchy here, but you're the one that chooses and decides what's right for you, and it's not going to be every institution ultimately.
I think there's a question back there.
So, I've heard a legend that if you accept a lecturing position, you will not be able to move up from the status of a lecturer. Is that true? Does that position kind of cap you in that space, or what are your thoughts about that, the transition from lecturer to tenured professor?
I love legends. So I touched on this very, briefly early on, but it's probably unlikely to move from a lecturer position to a tenure track position within the same institution, but no way, that experience as a lecturer is totally valuable if you're on the job hunt. So yeah, no, it doesn't lock you in perpetuity into a lectureship position, but the likelihood of transitioning within the same institution, it just, I don't know, I mean, for better or worse, it doesn't happen a lot, and I think it has something to do with like, you know the flaws of your colleagues, and other people feel very new and shiny. I know this is being recorded, and but I'm being totally honest. I think there's some psychological thing that happens, but it can't. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think it's just rare.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. And I've had institutions where there was a lecture, and it's like you've already negotiated your salary, so your institution you have to win a MacArthur in some institutions to move, up and for them to be convinced to renegotiate your contract. And people do. I mean, it happens, but I wouldn't want to count on that. I think the other thing that I think is important to success is just the flexibility. You can't always get the dream job in the city of your first choice. You have to be a little flexible. Like, I know now I want to live adjacent to a city. I was never going to take a job that was not in a city, and here I am sitting in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. So a little flexibility is key, and the ability to kind of pick up and move and decide, is the job more important, or is the location more important, or is the community, the art scene more important, and it might change at different points in your life, too.
Thank you.
All right, maybe I'll ask a question if there aren't any others. So we talked about how to get teaching experience. About the search process, do we want to reveal anything, or do we feel comfortable talking about how the search committee actually works? Or do you have any interest in hearing that? Okay.
In what way?
What's the search committee? How do they work? What's the difference between, what's the flow of how they deliberate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll speak to that in my experience. So, I mean, each one's going to be different, again, depending on the institution, but generally they're going through a lot of applications, and they're trying to do so as efficiently as possible within a very compressed, period of time while trying to wrangle people who are really busy. So again, going back to what was said earlier, just make sure your application materials are clear and efficient. I guess other things to keep in mind, usually one of the big things that comes up is just kind of like waiting. So you've been interviewed and you're like, well, when am I going to find out what's going on here? And I would say in my position, I applied for my job at CCS in the summer, and I didn't hear back from them until, Thanksgiving. So I had moved on. I thought they had moved on. I was like, okay. I mean, I guess I could have potentially, you can reach out and just ask. And with the position that I have now, after, I think it was maybe like a couple of weeks or so, one of the hiring managers just reached out to me to let me know that they're still reviewing applications. So I would say just in general, just be patient. And yeah, it doesn't hurt to send an email if you're kind of really, especially if you're juggling, if you're in the fortunate position, of having, I guess, multiple applications and getting multiple placements with institutions that are all going to be on different timetables. So let's say, you get an offer at institution one, and then you're really also interested in this, potential offer at institution two, but they haven't followed up yet. You can let them know, like, hey, I've been accepted here. I feel like there are ways of doing this, maybe in like good or bad faith, but I feel like any search committee is also going to be really sensitive to the fact, especially if they have a strong candidate that's been, extended multiple offers, especially if they don't want to lose that candidate, being sensitive to just being responsive. If you are in a tight spot and want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best options possible in kind of getting to know things sooner rather than later. So it can get tricky if timing comes under a crunch, but you're dealing with people who understand. They understand what you're going through, but they're also kind of doing their best to kind of do a lot of due diligence in getting to a candidate. And then, some search committees fail, like they just don't find someone. So they have to start all over. Again, every search doesn't always result in an actual find. So yeah, sometimes you start all over again, and that's also a part of the process.
That's hard. So I'll say, talk maybe a little bit to add on to what Ebby was saying. So a search committee is a committee of typically faculty. I would say about 5-ish is a good number. Sometimes academic staff are involved. Typically this committee does this initial run through that Ebby talked about. And this is so I would say no fancy CVs, easy to read, because they are skimming through tons of material. They winnow down a set of candidates they want to talk to. They make a short list, and then you will, if you're on the short list, you'll typically be invited for a Zoom interview, online interview. It's usually pretty short, half an hour to 45 minutes. They will have typically a standardized set of questions they ask every candidate. This is an HR procedure that is mandated, so every candidate gets the same set of questions, and then there'll be some space at the end for you to ask questions, which is really important. Come with your questions. And then once...
Don't ask about salary, though.
Not at this point. No, not at this point. But about clarifying questions about the institution, about, teaching, about collegiality, about how things, whatever. But they're expecting you to have questions. They will then further winnow down that list to usually about 3-ish on-campus interviews. And they will then invite the candidates to campus. And it's anywhere from a day to 2 days of an interview. So it's a very long, pretty grueling process because you are always on. And you will typically be asked to do a talk about your research and teaching. You may be asked to do a classroom demonstration. You'll meet with the search committee. You'll meet with the department chair. You might meet with the dean. You might meet with students. There will be lunches and dinners and a whole lot of stuff. A tour of the city. And what I would add is that at every single stage of this process, you are being interviewed. From the moment you submit that CV, every email you send back and forth, every conversation you have with office staff, people talk, be very nice. You don't, but it's important to know, and that's what I think makes it such a challenging interview, is that from the moment somebody picks you up for breakfast that you're on. And then there'll be another stage of deliberation, and the committee will typically make a slate of candidates that they recommend. That recommendation then goes up through the administration. So search committees are committees that make recommendations for the most part. They are not actually deciding who is being hired. Even as a chair, it's not technically my decision. The committee makes a recommendation to me. Then we get in this tumbleweed of letter writing. They write a letter, a memo to me. I write a memo to my boss. My boss writes a memo to the provost. But then, somewhere in that stage, the chair and the dean are negotiating based on the recommendation of the committee who they want to hire. And a salary at that point offer is set. Other components of the offer are established. So you might have startup funding, which is research funding that you can use. You may have moving funding that's offered. There may be relocation costs. So that sort of initial offer package is produced, and then you'll be, whoever they're going to offer to will be contacted, and the offer will be offered. And then it's typically expected that you will not accept that offer immediately on that first phone call, that you say, thank you, I'm going to consider the offer, and that you do consider that offer and counter offer. And this is where you reach out to your peers who have gotten academic jobs, your mentors, and you say, okay, I've got this job, how do I negotiate this? But you should always negotiate.
Absolutely. And I will add that, if you get a campus visit, if you're the first candidate in, it could be up to 6 weeks before you hear back.
Yeah.
Even we're still working on it. Because if you're the first candidate, it might take 2 weeks to get all of the candidates in. I had searches where we were able to bring in 4 people, so that's, and they were grueling 2-day things, so that took 2.5 weeks. And then once the committee deliberates, and they're busy people, sometimes it takes a few days to gather them together, the negotiation back and forth with the first round offer can take 2 weeks. And if you're smart, you negotiate it. You don't drag it out. If you don't want the job, you don't drag it out. But if you get another offer, sometimes you're very lucky and you get you're a finalist for 3 people, and you really want that third one. I would never hold out for that third one if you have 2 good offers, because it might not come. But you do want to let those other places know that you have an offer, and when can you expect to hear from them? And that negotiation really can be a lot of things. It could be money. It can be a research leave. It could be a coach. It could be lots
Course
of
reduction in your first year of teaching.
Yep.
Yeah.
To, I guess talking or thinking about this initial screening, which is typically either a phone interview or a Zoom interview, it's going to feel more than likely very deadpan, very, I don't know, if you're trying to get a read on the faculty in those Zoom meetings, you're not going to, because they're just trying to get through those questions as efficiently as possible. And that's where you also want to be as succinct and clear as possible. So, you're still showing yourself to be a professional, a kind and friendly person, but you're not just you're not waxing on and on and on and on and on and on and on with every single question, because they are trying to get through, I think, as many questions as they can, usually within like sometimes 30 minutes. Like they can be literally that short. If you get invited to do an interview at the institution, things are different. I mean, you're still very much on, as Lorna said, but like now you're in a position also to interview the institution, and I know that might seem odd because you feel like, oh, I've made it. You just want to be like the salesperson, you're just trying to land the job. But two things. Well, first of all, the people who are at the institution who are interviewing you, they're trying to get a sense of like, this could be somebody who's here for the next decade plus. So they want to see your personality at that point. And the same thing for you. As you're looking around, think to yourself, do I see myself being here for the next however long you'd want to be there? And are these the kind of people I want to be around too? So you are being interviewed, but you are also interviewing them too. And it might seem like, because it's an intense day, it's a long day, you're probably going to feel exhausted by the end of it, but take moments, just kind of take a breath and to assess things on that level. It's like, all right, like, is this the right fit for me? As you're talking about all the things that would potentially make you a good fit for the job, you really want to think about like, okay, is this what I want as well while you're like have like a human check-in, moment with yourself. Well, several check-ins with yourself if you get to that point, if you get to that position.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think, they've already invested in you at that point. They have paid money to get you to campus, like they want you. It is a powerful position to be in. But you are like, they are trying you out as a colleague, and you are trying them out as a colleague. And I think, in this era of teaching, collegiality, warmth, a sense of humor goes a long way. So yeah, I mean, all of that stuff is important. The soft skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the Zoom interview, if we want to back up, they ask the same questions every time. So I see your question, but I just want to tell you what to be prepared for, because if you prepare kind of an answer, you can be more succinct. And you shouldn't read it or, say the same thing for every institution. You still have to be in the moment. But they're going to ask you, why did you apply for this job? Sometimes they start with, tell us about yourself. So you should have 3 sentences at the most. If they want more information, they'll pull it out of you. They'll say, can you say more about this? Or what do you mean by that? Then your question should be prepared. And then, they're going to ask about the job. What have you ever taught printmaking before, or stuff like that.
Talk about your research.
Yep, talk about your research.
A really common one that I hate is, what's the most difficult thing that's happened in a classroom? Can we just ban that?
Yeah, when did a conflict happen?
Yeah.
And if you do get hit with something that feels a little weird, or maybe not off, but just kind of takes you a minute, then take a minute. I think it's okay to say, let me think about this, for a second, or just to say,
I think it's more than okay. It shows that
Yeah.
you're thoughtful.
Yes.
And
They shouldn't hold that against you. It means that you're being thoughtful about your response.
I mean, it's even cool to be like, can we circle back to that? Like, let me think about that. Or find a parallel experience that, you can say, if you have not had a negative classroom experience, say, I've had other experiences in the world and this is how I've dealt with them, or this is how I would deal with this thing. Yeah.
I think there's a question.
So my question was actually about the 6-week hang time that you described between getting an answer and not getting an answer. If you really like the job, you don't have any other offers lined up, is it appropriate to reach out during those 6 weeks and be, hey, just wanting to know if there's an update, I really appreciated your time? Or if they set that expectation of it's going to be 6 weeks before you hear, is it better to stay silent and give them that space?
There's kind of an arms race. So I was a director at UF for 4 years, and we hired 11 people. So there's an arms race with thank you notes. So you can immediately after the first interview, you can write. I would just write to the chair of the committee and say, thank you, I really enjoyed our conversation. And if you didn't answer a question, you could say, I really, wish I would have said this, or, but I wouldn't send a long email. After a campus visit, you can write to everybody on the committee. It's not going to make or break it, but it is a nice, I have had committee members that are like, I didn't get a thank you note, It's just like, oh my gosh, everyone's busy. But there is kind of an etiquette that you thank them for having the interview. And then they should, and this is a mark of like the quality of the institution, the colleagues, if it's taking 6 weeks, the chair of the committee or the chair of the department should reach out to you and say, hey, I just wanted to send a note that we're still deliberating. Please let me know if anything changes on your end.
I will say, and that's if you've had an interview. I think, if you haven't been offered the interview, I wouldn't reach out to ask at that juncture.
But if you've been to campus, they want to hear from you, and they want to know that if they're going to call you for an offer and make an offer, that you're still interested in the job. So if 6 weeks have gone by, and we do this in like October through February. So those are kind of the high seasons. And it's, again, kind of an arms race. We're all trying to get the offer in your hand as soon as possible. And if you get more than one offer, then you're trying to slow the roll as long as you can to get all the interviews in. So the communication is okay, but always be nice, always be succinct.
Thank you so
and
much.
I think I agree. Like I wanted to say this about the thank you thing because I do think it's like the unwritten, the stuff you wish you knew before you did the thing and didn't know. But it actually does matter. I think it's not going to make or break it, but it does show your level of engagement as a colleague. And it is a really great opportunity. Like if you feel like I muffed that one question, I really should have said this, it gives you that little bit of opportunity to say, I thought about this more. And it shows them that you're reflecting back on the conversation, like pull out a detail from the conversation. Say, I really was drawn to when you all said this about your institution, and that really resonates with me. And that's why I'm even more excited about this position, Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes some of the deliberations on the committee might be like, you went to Cranbrook, why would they want to teach at this, regional liberal arts university? Are they really interested in us? And things like that show that you're interested in the position. And if you don't have any of the other things, you're probably not going to get the job. But if you and somebody else, all things being equal, your level of engagement with how much you did research about the job, how much you knew who the people were and they'll tell you who's on the committee and before the first interview. And
if they
have to know
don't, you should ask.
Yeah. And by the time you get to campus, you should know something about their research and, not their wife's name or anything. That's weird. Don't do that. But, do the things anything you can find on the website, you shouldn't be asking questions about by the time you get to the campus visit.
And I want to share what you mentioned, knowing people's wives' names. You do not have to disclose personal information in an interview. And
it's illegal for them to ask.
It is illegal for them to ask, but humans are humans, and they will occasionally slip up and ask it could even be a friendly intent, but you are not obligated to answer questions about whether or not you have a partner, or children, or a disability, none of that. Mm-hmm. So, that's a difficult situation to be in.
It's tough at dinner, because people are going to ask you about your life, but yeah, you want to be careful, especially if you're, I'm saying this from my own experience, if you're a woman, it's the art world and it's not equal and fair. So, you want to be, and especially at a research one. I'm just making broad generalizations, and people are getting better now. But I would be as professional as you can. Talk about your work. Talk about how interested you are in the job. Talk about how much you love the city. Has that ever happened to either one of you?
I've had on the other side some faculty who have been surprised. They're like, "Did you know so and so had kids?" And I was like, "No, but they did." Anyways, yeah. So I think it's changing, but there were some old school dudes that really got in. into inappropriate things. And I do distinctly recall from my interview at Wayne State, some of the folks on the search committee kind of, somebody would ask something inappropriate and they would be like, you don't have to answer that, which was really lovely. And I think, on the other side, and that's a good sign. It is actually a good sign when there are people there, that, if you see like interest in your well-being in that interview, that's a good sign.
Empowered to, like, say, if you are in the very awkward position of being asked an inappropriate question during the interview, to say, I'd rather not answer that, like, that's okay. You don't need to kind of fumble through. You don't need to make middle ground for something that shouldn't have been done to you. You could just refuse it, kindly and respectfully. That's a great point. Like, hopefully none of you end up in that position if, you get interviewed and have to navigate something as awkward as that, but it does happen. Yeah. So you want to be prepared, for that, and you want to be also potentially prepared to say, I'm not going to answer that, or yeah.
Yeah, and then deflect into something else. Just sort of like, move into, I don't talk about my personal life, but, I saw this really great show. Just kind of like, zoop, right through it. And hopefully one of their colleagues is kicking them under the table.
That note, too, I wanted to, you mentioned negotiating an offer, and I feel like that could be a point that feels really kind of like hard for people to, you've just been extended this offer, you might feel a lot of pressure just to say yes, and I agree, like, you always take time to think about it, and you always negotiate. A couple of things, or maybe just kind of one thing to consider in negotiating. You might feel like you're in a position where you don't have a whole lot of, power or agency, but they want you. They've said yes to you, so you actually are in a position where you do have power, or you might just feel bad about asking for more, like an Oliver Twist kind of moment where it's like, really. But, and I got really great advice when I got hired for my SFAI position. They're used to this. Like, the deans who are giving you this offer, they do this all day long, where people say, I want more. Like, if you have, strong faculty, that's what they're doing all the time, asking for more. So you negotiating isn't going to surprise them. Do it professionally. Know what you want, to be specific about what you want. Everybody's packages aren't going to be the same. So as far as negotiating, it's not always just like more money. It could come in different forms too. So maybe you have like, and a number, and I feel like a lot of colleagues are in this position where maybe you just got accepted into a Kohler residency, and it's like, look, I just got this amazing opportunity. I need a semester off, or I need a year, off, depending on the institution. They may or may not have the flexibility.
This is a research one negotiation.
Yeah. Exactly. They may or may not have the flexibility to lean into these things, but they're also used to hearing them. You don't need to feel bad in bringing something up that does really matter to you. If it's like, I'd really love, a little more research money, or, maybe like a course release, et cetera, or just more money in general. Like, they're used to hearing these things, so you don't need to feel awkward at all. And
there will already be a range involved. So there is typically a salary range that we can hire at. I'm not going to say that most institutions offer at the lowest end, but they leave themselves wiggle room typically to negotiate up as needed. So yeah, it is expected that you're going to ask for that.
Do you have a question?
Oh, I wanted to add, before you ask your question, it's on my head. Pro tip, that many public institutions, their salaries are publicly accessible. You can look up how much I make. It takes a little bit of digging, but so if you're applying for a public institution, look at what the other assistant professors are making.
And it's usually a couple years old too. So
then you ask a little bit higher. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the interview and what you all recommend, the frame of mind you recommend inhabiting when it comes time to ask your own questions to the interviewers.
Well, I recommend you go into any Zoom interview pretty prepared. You know something about the job and the place, and you've been on their website, and so you have some questions prepared. But you'll interview better if you can just relax and be in the moment. So if you go into every interview and just know that you know things, and just listen to their questions, try to answer their questions succinctly, and then sometimes there's a question that comes up in the conversation that you can ask about, and sometimes that can be very informal during the interview, but that first interview, they have to ask everybody the same 4 to 5 questions, so that it might be awkward, and so waiting to the end might be an option. But I would show that you're interested in the job, and the place, so I would ask something about them. It's kind of like a date, and so I always ask, not the same question, it's different institutions, but something about the culture. If there's a person I'm going to report to that isn't in the room, and I've been an administrator for a while, but I'll ask, tell me about the provost. just and they're gonna be professional, hopefully, but you're gonna get a sense if they're stumbling over that and trying to find adjectives. That's a sign about your provost. So ask open-ended questions. Can you tell me something about your students? If it's a teaching institution, that's a good question to ask. If you can, in that question, know something, I've read that you're 25% first-generation students. Can you tell me about how you support those students? It's about kind of getting in their head about what they're looking for in a colleague that you might not have been able. So it sounds really manipulative, but it is. But you also are trying to get in the headspace, because you really do want to work there, of what they're looking for in a colleague and how you can have a conversation about how you fit that.
Yeah, it's a way to signal that it's a way to say I this is important to me, and therefore I'm asking you. And I think don't ask questions that are you can easily find out. Don't ask look up
how many students you have.
Yep, look up the curriculum, look up the specs. Read through the job offer. Don't ask questions, but ask if there are clarifying questions. By all means, I read this. I understand this, but can you talk? Can you expand on that or talk more about that? I like to ask. I agree about the culture questions. Like, what is the culture of the institution? I ask what the goals are in the department that I'm interviewing for. What are your hopes? What are your hopes for this position? What is it that you need from this position? I think that helps me get a sense of because again, you are deciding whether this is a good fit for you. What you're teasing out maybe where if there's trip ups, teasing out if there's maybe an issue that you should have your feelers up for. Yeah.
To as has been said, these questions are you signaling what matters to you. And there's also a room within those questions to maybe speak directly to that. So it's almost like answering a question you haven't been asked, but saying, it really does matter to me that there's a strong sync between maybe the strength of the facilities as well as the rigor of the kind of community that's fostered in a studio environment, or a strong connection between critical studies as well as just sort of good community engagement between faculty and students. I think it's okay in that space to just kind of bring up things that you want to talk about, even if you're not picking apart something that you've seen on the website or something that you've seen that day. This is your chance to just say, this is what matters to me, and I just want to have a conversation about this right now. And I feel like I've done that a few times, and the faculty who are interviewing me usually have a lot to say about these things because they're in it. They're thinking about all of these things on a very deep level. So you'll probably get to that point, and again, it'll be a long day. You'll be exhausted. You'll be tired. But it's probably one of the strongest opportunities for them to get now a sense of like, okay, who are you and what matters to you to know in coming into this role. So feel free to make it a conversation, even if you don't have a specific thing that you want to tease out.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
I had a quick question that was kind of answered earlier with someone else's question, but how much consideration goes into like real life experience? Maybe you don't have a great background with teaching, but you've been supporting yourself as like an artist or a photographer or a designer in the professional field for the past decade or so.
I think it depends on the institution, but a research institution might really be looking for that. An art school might really love that because, you know, I got my first teaching job, I was 27. I kind of fell into it. I got really lucky. I learned Photoshop when nobody else knew it, and honestly, I think that's why. You know, most of the people teaching in institutions make their money teaching in institutions. So having somebody that knows something about the art world or professional photography or running living off of your work is incredibly important. If the artwork is incredibly important that the students are going to be making. So yeah, I mean, I think you need to find the right fit in the right institution, and you need to, in your cover letter, connect the dots with, you know, how long you did that and how it's related, and you know, why that experience is useful to this position. But you know, I've been at institutions that really valued that.
And I would say point it back to the classroom, because there is a trend right now, you know, there's challenging funding for higher education, and one of the sort of trajectories that higher ed is taking is like college to career programs, like job placement, and having real world experience in a field is really valuable. But then you have to sort of connect the dots back to the classroom. So I, you know, had this experience in the field, and this is how I would bring it to the classroom. Bringing students out of the classroom is super popular right now. Like, okay, so I have all these industry connections, and this is how I would engage my students in that industry.
Or bring that industry into the classroom.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's a way to kind of pitch that that vantage point. But again, some teaching experience is pretty crucial for those you know, tenure track lines, you know, the full-time gigs. But don't let that stop you.
I have noticed recently that looking at some jobs.
Microphone.
Thanks. That some postings have now, and I've only seen this recently, are not just looking for MFA holders. Some of them say BFA or MFA.
Really?
Yes, like there was a ceramics position recently at the University of Washington that was up for a tenure track, and it was very surprising. So I just want to know what your thoughts are on the requirements, academic requirements. So it's a little bit leads into the previous question about, you know, experience, things like that, and where in North America that kind of value is placed.
Oh, go ahead, Abby.
I don't know, I mean, my initial thought is in that sort of situation, they're probably specifically thinking about people who, you know, maybe they just have a BFA, but they have an incredibly strong studio practice or professional practice. So this is maybe somebody who, it just doesn't make sense for them to get their MFA, at this point. But if they're just an absolute star and incredibly competent as educators, maybe they've done a bunch of workshops, but they just literally just don't have the paper, because that's not the route they went. So I'd say in that sort of a situation, that's what I would expect, and not just like, somebody who graduated from their BFA, a few years ago. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of, my initial, thought, okay, like that's a way to let someone who's a real star in, who has the competency, but I wouldn't think that that's going to be the bulk of their applications.
I don't think it's terribly typical, and it depends on the institution. Some institutions require what we call a terminal degree. So an MFA is a terminal degree in the arts that would qualify one to teach at an university. But art schools, sometimes liberal arts colleges, will hire folks at the BFA level, particularly for like lecture positions or teaching faculty positions. We hire folks at the adjunct level with the BFAs, particularly in design, because we need, most designers go out and get full-time jobs in the field and make a lot more money. So yeah, it depends on the institution, but I think it would be typical even in those instances that that MFA is, or, that terminal degree is what's expected.
And a lot of times what Abby was saying is about the professional experience. We ask for a terminal degree or equivalent professional experience. And what we mean by equivalent professional experience is a pretty big career. You ran your own design firm for a design position, and you hired other people, and it might be a pretty well-known design firm.
You got yourself a Guggenheim.
You got a MacArthur, yeah.
They're also, like private institutions, and they're not beholden to, these other rules. So I friends and colleagues who taught at private institutions where they only needed their BFA, because it's, maybe like a Catholic school and, really strong facilities, really strong program. But yeah, no necessary requirement for there to be, for somebody to have a terminal degree or an MFA. So I guess it all just depends on what they're asking for, but it is possible to get a really good teaching position, but just,
You might not be able to teach grad students if you don't have, normally in an institution, the accreditors, if they're accredited, look for a degree higher than the lowest degree, which, you run out of degrees at a certain point, so PhDs teach PhDs. But if you're teaching undergrads with an MFA, that's cool, but MFAs don't normally mentor PhD students in a particular field.
Just to add on, outside of North America, a lot of teaching positions do require a doctorate or PhD. Pretty hard to get that within studio arts. It's not very common.
Lauren has one,
I
right?
do have one.
Badass.
Just leave the U.S. So yeah, there's like maybe a couple programs.
I only know of maybe 5 programs in the United States.
Yeah, so it's far more typical in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand to have PhD programs, or they're called practice-based PhDs, and so yeah, it is far more expected, outside of the U.S. that one would have a PhD. But not necessarily, and actually some institutions will hire in MFAs with the expectation that within a certain amount of time you will get your PhD. So I'm happy to speak to what a PhD in practice-led research looks like, but it's like kind of an MFA plus. You write a really, really long paper, but you also, your research is your practice. And so, you would be familiar with what to do within a PhD program.
There's one more question, and then I think we're pretty much out of time, but we'll make it snappy.
Okay, so that being said, I I do know now there's some newer programs like Masters of Higher Education and then like Higher Education in Public Policy. And then there's also some PhD programs like obviously art history, things like that. So would PhD programs or additional master certifications in other fields like higher ed, would they be helpful, or should you stick to studio art?
I would say, if you're teaching studio art, we're looking for studio art like faculty. And so is a degree in higher education policy like going to make you a better art teacher or advance your research in, a creative practice in the field? Probably not. So I think we're still at a stage, in particular in the US, where the PhD doesn't matter. And I should say I recently got my PhD. I was already tenured faculty when I got my PhD. So it's not how I got my job. It's something I did because I wanted to advance my practice. And I was like, I can brush up on some contemporary theory because it's been a minute since I was in an MFA. So I fully do not believe it's necessary. Absolutely not.
And there's a big debate, not to force more pieces of paper and more debt and more time in school if it doesn't add anything to the experience too. So it's an ongoing debate, but the people I know that are artists with PhDs did it when they had a job and they had a sabbatical and they started it then. I think we have to stop there. Thank you all for coming, and and thank you, Ebby and
Thank you.
Lauren. This was amazing. And if you are thinking about academia, please take advantage of my office hours. I'm throwing Michael Stone Richards under the bus, but he's really good at. And we're different academics. He's got a PhD in art history too. So if that's more like the institution you're looking at too, you should probably talk to both of us. But use those resources and talk to your heirs, and we're here to support you. And if this is what you want to do, it's a really interesting job. Every day is different. So thank you for coming.